This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome back to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host. And on this week's episode, we have a great conversation with Steve Swinney. He is the CEO and co-founder of Kodiak Building Partners Incorporated, a $3 billion revenue-diversified building products distributor based in Denver, Colorado. Since its creation in July of 2011, Kodiak has grown through a series of 40 acquisitions and 3 business launches, along with extensive organic growth of its operating companies. With a decentralized and entrepreneurial culture, Kodiak was honored with a spot on the Inc. 5000 list for the past 5 years, along with being recognized as the largest Colorado-based company to earn that distinction. In 2022, Steve was selected as a winner of the Ernst Young Entrepreneur of the Year award for his entrepreneurial spirit, purpose, growth, and impact on the region's business landscape. In 2023, Steve was recognized as the ColoradoBiz Magazine CEO of the Year finalist and Denver Business Journal's Most Admired CEO. In his free time, Steve enjoys spending time with his family, skiing, snowshoeing, and hiking in the Colorado mountains. And this is a great conversation between Steve and Richard. They get into how Kodiak was started, which happened right after the financial crisis. Really fascinating stuff about how his company came to be, some lessons that he's learned along the way, and just some great insights on how to lead people. And so I hope you'll enjoy this conversation with Richard and Steve. As always, we'll have links to how to connect with Steve and his company. Information will be in the show notes.
Well, once again, I'm very privileged to have a special guest with me on this podcast, Steve Swinney, a business leader in Denver, Colorado, just recently moved into a new office building. And I've had a chance to know Steve in my work with CEOs for over the last couple of years. And Steve, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Richard, it's fantastic to be here. I've listened to this for a long time and gotten a lot out of it. So honored to have a chance to visit with you a little bit today.
Well, we love having guests of people that listen to the podcast being on the podcast. So welcome. And Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're a business entrepreneur, a business leader. And I always like people just to hear something of the leadership journey that people have been on. And so tell us what you do and how you got to that place today.
Sure. So what I do today is that I'm the CEO of Kodiak Building Partners, and it's a company that I founded with 3 friends that I'd worked with previously. Back in 2011, we launched the company, and our business is building product distribution to professional builders. So think about home builders and contractors, and so we operate several different formats around the country. We're in about 25 states. And we've kind of put the company together through a series of about 40 acquisitions over the last 12 years.
Wow.
And so today we do just about $3 billion in sales annually to those home builders and contractors around the country. We've got about 6,300 employees around the country. And it's just been a fantastic journey. The last 12 years. I know we'll talk about that a little bit here, but just as far as a little background of how I got to the starting point of Kodiak, I actually grew up in Chicago and went to college at Abilene Christian University down in Texas and was an accounting major there. So I did accounting and then got an MBA in finance a couple of years after that. And then from there, really moved around the country, I should say, to Minnesota, back to Chicago, and then out here to Denver in a series of jobs, finance jobs in different industries. And then in 2007, had the opportunity to join a company that was really forming here in Colorado called ProBuild. And it was a company that was in this industry that I now operate in this building product distribution world. And it was my first experience in the industry. And, I got there just in time for the Great Recession, which is, of course, impactful to our whole economy, but especially impactful to anyone who is in this home building world. And so really through that transformative event in our industry, had the opportunity to launch Kodiak in 2011.
Wow. And Steve, there's a lot of people that are entrepreneurs who listen in, and I know there's a lot of folks. My son-in-law, Sam, for one, who is always intrigued by people that have a vision to start something new. But and there's a lot of entrepreneurs across America that will try businesses of various sizes. But for you to go from in 12 years from a startup to 3 billion in sales is that's a little unusual. That's everyone dreams of that, but not everyone makes that. What do you attribute your success to? Because that's you like you said, you came out of a kind of an economic tailspin there. It's not the best time to be starting up a business in the very field that kind of went south on you there. But you turned around and I assume made some adjustments, took a fresh run at it, and have been very successful. How'd that happen?
Well, I think there was a couple of things that really lined up extremely well for us. There was that the first was that transformational event. I mean, one of the big things I learned, particularly from the investing side over the years, was I heard a really great investor all the way back to when I was in college that said this, and I never forgot it. But he talked about how he looked for kind of major disruptive situations in business and industry, and then really bet big on those, and that's how he got there. And so for us in 2010, we were looking at everything we'd been through the last 4 years. And one of my team's roles there at ProBuild was to really do a lot of analysis for the ownership, which was a private investment firm, on really understanding what was happening. We were having this major crisis in the economy, and there have been hiccups and recessions along the way, but hadn't had anything like this since the Great Depression, really. And so we were always looking at data and information for them on what's happening here and how has this happened in past cycles. And candidly, it really over time it helped us develop this thesis for the fact that our industry was about to undergo this great resurgence and growth phase coming out of that. And we thought, why not go and raise a little bit of money and try to build a business and participate in that.
Wow.
So that was one thing. I think the second thing was that we did really have some ideas from what we had learned there through our experience at ProBuild that kind of guided us on how we wanted to do a consolidation. So our industry is incredibly fragmented, and so acquisitions are a big part of kind of any growth strategy in our space. And we just had some thoughts about how to do that a little differently. And we sit here 12 years later and are really blessed and kind of amazed at how it's all come together.
Wow. And if you acquire 40 different companies all into yours, there's got to be a lot of transitions and culture. I mean, I know you're trying to build a certain culture, but how do you do that with adding that many different companies, different states that they represent? That's got to be a leadership challenge all of its own.
It is. It's you make a lot of mistakes along the way, and you hope you don't make any fatal ones. But I think one of the things that has been really successful for us has been that culture piece is a big part of our diligence process. In the acquisitions, when you hear people talk about acquisitions, they always talk about due diligence, which usually means evaluating all the people, digging into the financials, and all those kinds of things, and we do all that. But I think a big part of our process is really evaluating: do we and that acquisition candidate, do we have similar cultures? Do we have aligned values? And because we have done that, it's amazing how aligned our culture is across Kodiak, despite the fact that, as you said, we're really the combination of 40 different cultures that have kind of melted together.
Yeah. And I mean, Steve, you're a Christian, and not shy about that, but does that, I mean, I'm assuming that doesn't mean that all you acquire are other Christian companies or companies led by Christians. How do you navigate that? Because I'm sure just because someone's a Christian doesn't mean that they'd be a good fit for you either,
That's
or your
sure.
culture.
You wish that was always the case, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think and we, Kodiak is we're majority owned by a private equity firm. We have been for the last 6 years, and for the first 6, we just had a group of individual investors. So, we've never been, quote, a Christian company. We're a company that's led by a very devoted Christian. And so I would just say, my faith really impacts and really guides the values and the culture that I want to have in our company. And so, there are times when we acquire a company that they are believers, and many times they're not. And it really, that's not really the tie that has to bind, if you will. It's really about just us having culture that aligns, and that culture for us is really a lot about empowering our people. It's about humility. It's about really just hard work and grit, and things like that drive us.
Well, let me ask you, since we've kind of brought our faith up a little bit here, so you lead a company that's, it's a secular company. You do secular work. And yet, how have you found, how practical is it being a Christian who has God available to you? Is God good for your business? Does he help you? And it's great to say, well, he gives me peace, he gives me morals, but are there any ways in which you're seeing God actively at work in the midst of your workplace, or any ways in which God just practically has helped you, perhaps making decisions?
Well, definitely. I guess I'd start and say this. When we go out and buy a new piece of equipment for one of our operations, sometimes we'll buy some pretty elaborate machines out there. And, if when you get that new machine in, you want to figure out how to make it work, and you have questions, right? And sometimes you don't know how to get it going. And so what do? Well, you call the person that made it.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I'd say just broadly is I kind of think about it like that. God, my belief, God created everything. He created our world. He created the construct of family. He created commerce and business. And I believe that means that he probably knows how it works best, just like that machine. And so I find, especially over the last 6 or 7 years in my life, I've really sought God a lot more in my business leadership than I had in the past. And I find that starting with him is really drives, frankly, much better decisions as a leader than I ever made in the past. And then I think just, a couple examples kind of come to mind just in terms of super practical things that inform us. One is on our role in the community. I look at what I've heard God tell me, through reading the Bible, that, God chose Israel, he rescued them, and he put them in the promised land and blessed them wildly. He didn't just do that so they could just have a great time. He did that so that they could be a blessing to the rest of the world. And so that's something that practically for me translates to, okay, when we've been blessed here at Kodiak, we have a responsibility to be a blessing to our community around us, to be a part of God's redemptive plan. And that's both Kodiak and then Linda and I and our family personally. I think that's just a practical lesson that God's given us of when you're blessed, use that to bless others. I think another one is, I was reading just yesterday and over and over again in the Bible, God exhorts humility. Yeah. And I think humility is one of the most important traits of a business leader, a successful one. And that's just another practical thing that, God's told us, do it this way, and it really works. And I've seen those kinds of examples over and over again where in business, I can look at what I see God speaking to us in the Bible or in prayer, and you know what? It works. It works, and it does lead to success. And that's not a prosperity gospel thing. That's just this is how God made the world. And when we follow, I believe that when we when we start listening to him and do it his way, it starts to work really, really well.
Wow. And what humility, it's even secular, people that don't even claim to be Christians recognize the value of humble leadership and leading others from a perspective of humility. But that's not always easy to learn, is it? I mean, you can't. Someone listening today can't say, I'm going to start being much more humble in the days to come. I mean, how do you cultivate that? Because I mean, in one sense, to be a successful entrepreneur, you've got to have some confidence to be able to get people to invest that kind of money. You've got to come across pretty confident in your ability, but at the same time, how do you be very successful and yet maintain humility? I would think that's harder to do. I mean, if you fail a lot, it's easy to be humble, you would think, but you've had a string of pretty significant success. How do you stay humble when you're setting new sales records each year?
Mm-hmm. Well, and you talk about courage and strength. You mentioned that's another one of those practical things that I'd put on what I've learned about being a leader. God, that's another thing that God talks about over and over again, is being strong and courageous. But I think that there's a combination of those two, of humility and strong and courageous, that's really important. And that combination is, what are you strong and courageous in? Are you strong and courageous because you think you've got it all figured out and you're smarter than everyone else and just know how it ought to work? Or are you strong and courageous because you're following someone who you believe actually does really know everything and guides you? And I think there's a lot of humility then, for me, approaching business that way, and knowing that, look, I don't know how on earth, why do I get to be in this position today? And why do I get this opportunity? I'm not smart enough to do all this, but for whatever reason, God's put me in this position. That drives a ton of humility when you feel like you've been chosen, even though you don't really belong there. That's helped me a ton. And I will also say, I would love to say that, my life has just been a string of success personally and professionally. And, it just keeps getting better every day. But, I think all your listeners would see right through that and know that we all go through some pretty tremendous ups and downs. And I would say, candidly, actually, when we met, I was in a real down. And when we met several years ago, and it's been one of the most transformative times of my life over the last several years coming through that. So I think when you fail, you learn a lot more than when you succeed. And so I've definitely had some learnings over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know, it's interesting, back in your business before this one, I think sometimes a significant fail or, disappointment early on, I think always kind of reminds you ever afterward how easy that is to happen again. It's don't ever take for granted that it's going to be just nothing but smooth sailing from here. You when you've experienced some storms along the way, to not take anything for granted. But a couple of years ago, you got to be you are part, and I am, of an organization called the CEO Forum, and one of the things that we do in that forum is do some kind of discipleship, leadership training. That's a 3-year program. That's when I first met you, and yeah, I know God used that in your life. And you kind of alluded to that, but for a guy, I mean, in those 3 years, I happen to know your business just really skyrocketed. You were a very busy guy. It's interesting because there's some folks that will join this training with me and others, but they won't do it till they retire. They'll say, I finally got the time now to take this class, and then about halfway through, they'll say, I wish I'd had it 20 years ago, when I was still in the seat and working, but they didn't think they had the time to do that. But you did take the time, and you'd come from Denver over to Dallas Fort Worth 3 times a year. How did you manage that? I mean, I think a lot of guys would say, if I was just, my business was growing, I think probably in that time, in those 3 years, I'm sure your sales may well have doubled
Mhm.
from what they were. It was quite significant growth, and yet you took the time to get away and learn, to be a part of a learning group. How did you do that, and what do you do just to keep on growing? Because I think a lot of guys are saying, hey, if I was doing $3 billion in sales, I probably could coast a little bit and just be happy with that. But it seems like you're still trying to learn, you're still trying to grow. How do you do that?
Well, I am because, I feel like, and we've gone through such a growth journey that I felt like, both personally and business wise, I've had to keep learning just to have at least a chance of keeping up with all this and
Hmm.
staying in the role that I'm in to lead the business. I think if I wasn't growing a lot, I think the business would have certainly outgrown me.
Hmm.
And someone else would be, sitting here running this and talking to you today.
Hmm.
But I think, when it came to that specific time period, um, I think one, I had a real awareness that um, that program was something it was essential for me. It was essential for me to become the leader I needed to be. It was essential to me um, to really find the way to really follow Christ the way I wanted to, but frankly wasn't doing and maybe didn't know how to.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was something for me that I knew there was nowhere more important for me to be those days when we'd be together than down there in Dallas.
Hmm.
And then the things that really came out of that were, I think, very transformational for me uh, as a husband and a father, as a business leader, and most importantly, just as a Christ follower.
Hmm. Yeah, I know that. Well, we love that. We appreciate guys who do make that a priority. But well, tell me, and you've touched on some of this, but what have been some of your greatest challenges as a leader? Leadership has probably never been easy, but certainly I think we all have our different areas of leadership that particularly push us. I've shared on this
Mhm.
podcast before, for me at least. I think certainly the greatest leadership challenges I've had have not typically been at the office. They've been when I got home from the office.
Yes.
And I don't know entirely why that is. But the times I just thought, I don't think I've got what it takes. I've usually not felt that way in my paid job, but I think we've said this often in this podcast, but leaders inevitably they come up against something that's bigger than them,
Mhm.
that they may have had a string of successes, but then they're going to hit something that's going to just push them right to the limit. What's been have you had some of those moments, or what have been some of the big challenges for you over the course of your leadership career?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that I see as a continual challenge for me, and it just shows up in different ways and forms, is really I'd kind of say it's this combination of one, I'd call it, leading from my core beliefs,
Hmm.
um, which drives me to really have to think about being very prudent and proactive about how I use my time each day.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and then I think the other way I think all of these are, I'm saying the same thing in different ways, but I think the other way I'd say it is about making decisions that are driven by your priorities.
Hmm.
And I would tell you, honestly that, my first 5 years of Kodiak, as we grew and, we got established and we kind of got over that startup hump and kept growing, I wasn't doing those things that I just talked about.
Hmm.
And so the success were that the numbers were growing, but I was really dying inside, and it was really causing a lot of, I think, pain and struggle for the people that are most close to me, around me, my wife and kids.
Hmm.
And at the core of it was the fact that I didn't trust God to take
Hmm.
care of us. And it took me a long time. I didn't know that at the time. At the time, if you'd asked me that, I would say, well, yeah, I've got to do all this, Richard, because we're starting a business, and how are we going to make it successful if I don't put in all this time, and if I'm not laser focused on this at the at the expense of everything else? And what that really was about was not trusting God that he was going to take care of us one way or another. He was going to take care of me and my family. He was going to take care of the business. And so since I didn't trust him, I had to do it all myself. And that's not a recipe for success, even in the short run, but especially in the long run. And so I kind of find now that the challenge to just continually be focused on what are the priorities, and not let the tension of urgent things or the things that seem like they ought to command all my time always do, because those will always shout louder than the things that I think God's really calling us to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell you what, there's a lot I think that can identify with that, and my wife for years, I kept saying, I knew that things were out of balance and my priorities weren't really in the right place, but you there's certain lies that you kind of believe. And for me, it was well, as soon as things slow down, as soon as I get things stabilized, as soon as we hit this level, then I can, then I'll kind of swing back around and I'll take care of my family the way I'd like to. And those are some kind of deceptions that I think a lot of folks believe. And when they finally do, if they ever do swing back around, it sometimes it's too late. Their family was tired of waiting, and they moved on. And so, I used to see my wife would kind of, make comments, and I'd try to, stave her off and give her some false promises. And it was kind of irritating. She was like my verbal conscience. And until I began to realize that's especially my wife, my kids, those were like the red lights on the dashboard that when they started flashing, that was, I had to, you don't keep driving your car when the engine light comes on, it's okay. We got to address this right away. And sometimes I think we just ignore those flashing lights. But yeah, it's interesting how many leaders can lead so well in business and then just really struggle sometimes with relationships that matter most. And
Absolutely.
but tell me, you've had a wide range of experiences. But if you were to just kind of grab a couple, and you probably touched on these some already, but what would be some of the big leadership lessons you would learn? Or if you were, if you could go back in time to yourself when you're like 25 and you would say, hey, here's 3 bits of advice that I would give you just so that you're going to have a more successful run. What kind of advice to leaders would you give after all you've been through?
Yeah. So, I started to allude to one, but I think, from the entrepreneurial journey, for sure, I think this lesson that I heard, it's now been 30 some years ago, of thinking about these disruptive situations, and those crises really do create tremendous opportunities. And if you look at business, you've seen that throughout history, that most really successful things do come out of some kind of crisis. And then the second piece of that is being able to have the conviction and the courage to really kind of, quote, as that investor that I mentioned said, bet big on it. One of the things that one of our favorite stories to tell here about our entrepreneurial journey is that back in 2012, when we were acquiring our second company, so we had about 40 million in sales at the time, and we had 80 employees, and we had this second deal that we wanted to do, but we had to go back out to our investors and raise more money because we didn't have any, and so we went to we had this collection of really individual investors and friends and family, and one of them, which he's become a huge mentor of mine and a great friend, is Don Porch, and he's a gentleman that's been really successful down in Houston over his career. And when I talked to Don about that second round, his first question to me was, well, are you investing in the second round? And I had to explain to Don, well, I'm not, because I don't have that much now. I put everything into the first round. I'm kind of just, I'm
Yeah.
committed, but I don't have any more dollars to invest. And he asked me, well, if I loaned you money, would you invest it in this round? And I said, well, sure, yeah, I'd do that. And he said, well, interest rates can be 10%. And, this was back when interest rates were, now that doesn't sound quite as bad as it did, but most interest rates were a little lower. And I said, yeah, I think we can do that. And then he said, well, you and Linda will both have to sign a personal guarantee. Okay, I'm sure she'd be happy to do that.
Wow.
And so at the end of the day, Don said to me and to the three guys that had joined me to start this, I'll invest in this next round of investment as much as you guys will borrow. So, you borrow 100,000, I'll loan it to you, and then I'll invest 100 of my own. And so collectively, we ended up being about 25% of that investment round, because we bet big and said, we really believe in this. We believe in what we're doing, and we're going to kind of put our money where our mouth is. So that conviction, conviction isn't about just taking these crazy, ridiculous risks. I think that conviction comes from doing a lot of research and doing the work and really being confident, being grounded in wisdom and effort, not just, I'll just roll the dice. So I think that's one really big lesson I've learned on the investing side. I think on the leadership side, there's two things I would say. One is just, it's about culture. And I think that culture in a company really drives success. And culture, when I say culture, to me, that's just, well, who are we? How do we do things? What's our values? What drives us? What's the Simon Sinek, great author would say, kind of what's your why? That's to me when I talk about culture. And so for us, really creating this strong culture, really communicating and getting people on board that buy into that and are engaged with it. I've seen that engagement really drive amazing, beyond my wildest expectations, success. When you get a core of people who are engaged and committed and aligned around a core set of values. And then the other one that comes to mind that I would just, I'd say it this way to any leader. I'd say, that comment I made about making sure your decisions each day are driven by your priorities. Yeah. And then if I'm talking to someone who's a young leader in business who's a Christ follower, I would say that a little differently. I would say, be all in for God, and don't believe the lie that, as you said, you don't believe that lie that you have to wait until you get to a certain point to do that. I look back and would just long for having, most of the last 20, 30 years back to redo with that last point as a centerpiece from the beginning, instead of figuring that out, 20 years in.
Yeah, I'm grateful that God is so gracious, because I think we all we shake our head sometimes at things we did in the past that we just didn't know, and now with some wisdom, it's kind of like child rearing. By the time you've got all the wisdom you need, your kids are walking out the door. It's like we're rank amateurs when we start out, and you've got to learn that as life goes on. But the American culture, society is changing a lot, and we all know that, and the workforce is changing. I know there's a lot of challenges that come with that. I think when you and I started working, it was a different kind of world than the one that now I think we're operating in. I know that comes with some challenges. I know that means that for business leaders and every kind of leader, we may have to make some adjustments in how we lead, just considering the younger generations that are coming up. And so I guess just maybe a final, just two-part question with American culture and society the way it is and the way it's changing, is that creating any challenges for you as a leader that are causing you to have to perhaps adjust the way you maybe would have handled things 10 years ago? And then lastly, with all the things changing in society today, Does that open up some opportunities? Entrepreneurs have a way of seeing opportunities when others see problems. And so maybe two-part one, just with all the changes going on, are there some challenges, adjustments leaders have to make? And number two, are there some opportunities that are unfolding as a result of what's going on in society today?
Sure. I mean, I think, well, one thing that obviously we're all kind of navigating through tactically, I think, as leaders, is this whole issue of, are you in the office or not, and how
Mm-hmm.
often are you in the office, and I
Hmm.
think that's been an adjustment. I grew up in an era where, you were, when I was young and starting out, you were in the office 5 days. You might be there 6 days,
Yeah, yeah,
um, and there was not even in consideration for, work from home all the time, or even a day. You might be able to come in a little late, because you had to go to the dentist or something one morning.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's been an adjustment.
Hmm.
For us, we're our corporate team here is in the office Monday through Thursdays, and then we've kind of given Friday as an optional day. And not surprisingly, it's pretty quiet around here on Fridays.
Yeah.
But I think that's been an adjustment that we kind of navigated through. How do we think about that? And when we landed on this over these past few years, we really just said, we think there's something incredibly vital and powerful that happens when we're together collaborating.
Hmm.
And we think that drives a tremendous amount of development in younger people when they're interacting,
Yeah.
with the leadership and with the teams here. And so we just said, we just can't do without that. Number
Yeah.
one. And number two, most of our 6,000 employees, they're out on trucks and in warehouses and delivering product day in and day out. And so there's also, I think, a leadership dynamic of, even if we could do our jobs just as well sitting at home as we could here in the office, I think we have a responsibility to be aligned with our partners out in the field who do have to get up and get into the yard every day.
Hmm.
So we landed on that, but at the same time, we were able to adapt and at least give a little flexibility, because let's face it, it's really tough. We got a lot of young people working here in our accounting and finance and HR and marketing teams and IT, and they got families they're juggling. They're probably you know probably both parents in the household are working, and they're juggling childcare and everything else. And so we found that we felt like we could give that day
Hmm.
for more flexibility, but still maintain, kind of all the benefits of being together and collaborating and building culture together. So I think
Hmm.
that's one thing that I know a ton of the business world is really navigating through in terms of a change right now.
Hmm.
When I think about America and our society and everything, I just think, um, I believe that America really desperately needs leaders um, who are going to lead from a servant perspective. And it's like we were talking about earlier. That doesn't have to be. I don't think you have to be a Christ follower to be a successful business person by any stretch. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't advocate for that. I wouldn't advocate that that's the case. But I will say that I think the way Jesus modeled leadership is an absolute recipe for successful leadership in our world, not only today, but at any other time.
Hmm.
Someone who mentored, who was humble, who led with a lot of grace, and at the same time, a lot of strength and courage and conviction. Putting
Hmm.
all that together, that's what our country, and that's what I think businesses, operating in our kind of any organization needs today,
Hmm.
with so much kind of strife and conflict and everything else. I just think there's never been a more important time for great leadership that looks to care for people and unite people, rather than drive people apart.
Hmm. It's interesting. A lot of the younger generation, they're very idealistic, and sometimes you can kind of see that as naive. They want to change the world. They want to value the family, uh, and yet, I think in some ways, servant leadership, Christian leadership, it addresses so many things that the younger generation is looking for. Uh, Servant leaders that are not just domineering, controlling, but abusive, exploitive. You would think even if a person was an atheist, that they would still figure out they'd like to work for a Christian, though, because the culture that develops is just better. It's the kind of thing they'd want to work with. And so I appreciate, Steve, just the insight. I knew it would be great being here with you and hear what you have to say. Any last word that you'd have for us?
Well, I guess maybe just piggybacking on what you just said. I think we all as leaders, we want to create an environment that people just really want to be a part of. I think that's I've read stats, and I won't get them exactly right, but something like 30% of people in America get up and go to work every day and are actually engaged in that organization. And engaged meaning, hey, I know what the mission is there. I really buy into it. I'm willing to go the extra mile, to make sure this is a successful venture because I believe in what we're doing and I'm excited about it and I'm a part of it. 3 out of 10 people, get up and go to work with that mindset every day. Yeah. And we've actually started doing engagement surveys here, which is something, just a tactical thing I'd encourage any business leader to do because it really gives you the voice of what your employees are actually really thinking about your culture and not just what you think they think about it. But our engagement level is up around 80%. Wow. So that means about 8 out of 10 people on our team get up every day and they're ready to go and excited about it and wanting to find ways to go the extra mile. I just feel like, if you build a culture that 8 out of 10 are doing that versus the average being 3 out of 10, you're going to have some pretty good success over time. That's just, no different than a sporting event. If you got 8 guys on the team that are going for it and most of the rest of the team's just kind of mailing it in, well, you know how that game's going to end.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing. And I was thinking about, we have a lot of young people that work in our corporate office here. And so one of the things kind of is maybe just parting stuff is I think a lot about younger leaders and how do you get from there to here. I think my message for those leaders who are listening to your podcast would be, number one, just look for opportunities where you're going to learn and grow. There's, it's easy to kind of go, well, here's where the biggest paycheck offer is right now. But I think when you're thinking about this 30, 40-year career journey, in the long run, being in the places that accelerate your learning and your growth are the places that are going to drive you to leadership success. And I think the second thing I would tell that particular group is just to learn to do hard things. And by that, I mean, for the most part, we have the skills to do the job that we're in. That kind of grit that's developed by leaning in and really stretching yourself and taking on tougher assignments and having the courage and conviction to do that, and the confidence that you're going to be able to learn from those, hopefully that learning environment that I just talked about. But doing hard things is another piece that I think just builds resilience throughout your career that you're going to need you're going to need that more and more as you get through life, whether it's challenges your family goes through, things at work, whatever the case may be. Life does definitely bring some hardships. Christ didn't promise us a hardship-free experience here. He just promised us that he'd teach us how to navigate through that. He'd always be there to carry us through that. But I think experiencing that and developing that resilience and grit is really critical in life.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's great advice. And I'll tell you, as someone who hires people, I love hiring people who are good at doing hard things, who aren't intimidated by it, that roll up their sleeves and get invigorated by the challenge. And so, great advice. Well, Steve, I knew that our time would fly by. You've got obviously a wealth of wisdom and insight. We're going to list all kinds of links and things to Steve's business and just ways that you can learn from him. He's done it. He's in the middle of doing it, and of great advice, very practical. And so, Steve, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule just to be with us today.
Thanks so much. Great being with you, Richard, and great talking to you. And I just thank you for the impact you've had on my life through that SLI program and through our friendship. I appreciate that immensely.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we look forward to hearing, just the listeners hearing and benefiting from all your wisdom that you shared today.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackaby.org.